Shock, pan, flash, and awe. Shock, pan, flash, and awe. We were dancing on the catatonic flesh of mole rats. Ghosts of Delmar's main haunts. The cops beat the shit out of people's plane. These skinny, frail, pale freedom fighters for public viewing pleasure.
The initiative to have a theme for the open forum actually came from me because I feel a lot of the time we're having a lot of interesting and dynamic discussions about how things got to where we are. We all know the mechanisms. We kind of every day discover new things, but it still ends up being part of the same structure that we try to oppose and critique and get past and beyond. And one of the reasons for this happening is that the way we talk about things, the way we personally, our personal dispositions, what we trust and how we know ends up translating into what becomes interesting for us is still framed within a very specific kind of lobotomized structure of where knowledge is not connected to knowledge, to life, to how we think, we feel, how we react, and it ends up still segregating groups. Animals, people, according to race, gender, species, domesticated animals according to breeds, some breeds are more violent than others. There's always a way of separating beings. And in my experience, I've been coming more and more across this wall of these personal dispositions from people who are willing to get beyond it, and yet they don't see how the problems, like they see abstractly how it's not good to oppress the donkeys, or it's not good to oppress the Chinese, or the open market in Russia is perhaps not such a good thing for them. And when people from there come and talk about these issues, well, we sympathize with you, but it sort of doesn't really connect and relate what it doesn't have to do with me. And this barrier is really important because, in a way, it just keeps this experience kind of in a separate space, just like oppression is in a separate space. The way knowledge is formed, even in anarchist circles, it's still based on, who we trust will tell us how it is. And it's still kept white male-dominated space. So my desire is not to point fingers, because we know, we've pointed them. How do we just, all of us, get beyond this wall? How do we respond with what we know, what interests us, to include what interests them, that they are us, and that if they are upset or if they are oppressed, it's not that we are going to help liberate them, we're going to open up this space so all of us participate. And the freedom in the anarchist circles, or the understanding of this freedom, totally does not speak to the people of color elsewhere. It just, immigrants come and they're concerned about getting jobs. African Americans, descendants of slaves, they're concerned about just, we were talking in the car, is it $5 minimum wage, or is it going to be $6 minimum wage? And if you come and tell them, well, how about getting beyond wage, forget about work. It's like, no, You can afford to think that way. My desire is to survive and to get 3 minimum wage, $6 jobs. Because the reality does not. So their desire is completely constricted by the structure that gives certain people more possibilities to dream and to want and to know and to find things interesting. That your freedom, your minimum wage is interesting for me, not because it's about you, it's also about me. So how do we just constructively get beyond this separation? I don't have the answers. That's why I thought it would be really good to have, different opinions, different, we're coming from very different, also intellectual space, personal space, and all of you to have a constructive discussion of how can we get beyond this lobotomy. So that's my little introduction. And any questions, or would you like to add anything?
Well, one of the way that I come at this is being an organizer for this. I don't know if it's a movement or a network or this. I'll just say this space, and being a Black female in that role, and still not always feeling that I fit into or I'm a full participant in the space, or are longing for other conversation partners too. Not instead of, but to. And the ways in which that's sort of weird for me as an organizer, because I'm constantly organizing something and working at something, and the other organizers who are here know that we try to be very intentional about inviting people of color and women in particular, and making the space open for people. And yet, sort of the same, it's kind of the same sort of group with the same kind of ratios, and trying to think about why that is. That even as somebody who fits the categories of people who I want to have conversations with too, it's still very difficult for people to enter into this anarchist discussion, either because we're speaking past each other. So maybe an issue of translation, like how do we take this thing that we really hold on to, and particularly as Christians, how do I as a Christian who have translated and see my faith in this particular way, how do we translate that or meet people where they are, or how does it become interesting to other people? Mm-hmm.
I'll just throw another angle at this, and I hope it doesn't sound like I only have one song to sing. Maybe I do only have one song to sing. But let me at least point to a Bible story. Pair of stories, because I think they're paired stories. In John's Gospel, we have a pair of stories. One about Jesus' encounter with a guy named Nicodemus. And the following chapter, Jesus goes to Samaria and encounters a woman. And some of you may know the stories, and I won't get into all the details matter. But the way the stories are paired, in the Nicodemus story, Nicodemus is the guy of privilege. He's a ruler, he's dominant culture, he's a Pharisee, he's identified with the temple. And he comes to Jesus at night, so nobody will see him. In the paired story, Jesus goes to Samaria to encounter a woman who's outsider, discriminated against group, in a foreign place that's off limits to the dominant culture group, like a white guy going to a black drinking fountain in Mississippi in 1950, something like that. And the stories are paired, I think, for a pedagogical purpose that I hope may shed some light on this conversation. And That is, that what Jesus says to Nicodemus is, if you want to see the kingdom, you've got to start all over again. Or as my friend Bob Ekblad presents it in his book, saying to a white guy, if you want to see the kingdom, you've got to be born black. Which leads Nicodemus to go, how can you be born black if you're white? You know, what does that even mean? And so Nicodemus walks away scratching his head, not getting what the invitation is. In the next story, Jesus goes to Samaria. The text says it was necessary for him to go to Samaria. And when the disciples are around, they have no idea why he's there. They know he's not supposed to be there. He's not supposed to be talking to a woman, and the whole thing makes no sense. But the Samaritans end up welcoming him in and declaring him Savior of the world, which is a title that otherwise belonged to the Roman emperor. A title that nobody else has. It's nowhere else in the Bible. And I think what those stories are pointing to, at least for me, is the kind of journey that Liza was talking about, there you are, in her presentation. That journey to the other side, to the place that's foreign. Not what we tend to do is say, why won't they come here? How can we go there and be totally disoriented? So we don't talk like intellectuals. So we don't use abstract categories like epistemological, anarchistic, if people want to use those categories, fine, but if we expect other people to engage for whom that's alienating and elitist, and why should we be surprised? One of the things that you were saying, Lisa, that I thought was so powerful and beautiful was just to be able to go to places where you don't understand the language and just be there. And the vulnerability and utter lack of control, other than your own choice just to be there or not be there, that remained your choice. You could go home. That's still a privilege. But other than that, nothing is in your control. And I think that's, at least for me, a key to what, it's not an answer, at least a direction that I hear from both of your challenges to us.
Well, okay, my response to that would be, a question and a comment. And the comment would be that in order to go there, we need to open up and to know. Epistemology helps us because it's the study of knowledge. So if you start breaking down what you know and you find there are barriers to what you don't know, how your knowledge has been constructed, and you can go out with your knowledge, and open up and receive the knowledge of the other, that becomes your knowledge, your way of seeing the world. That's a good thing. But apart from that, there's also the real going. Do you go as a tourist to, go to a cave, eat some crickets, and then go back to your empire? Or do you go with all the bridges burned? Because the going will be very different. And both epistemologically and, with your appetite. Just go there. How do we go there? It's a very good point, about going. But where do we go and how do we go? And do we get a ticket back? Or is it a one way?
I don't...
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry. I was going to add on to what you were mentioning about language. I see one of the very critical problems within any radical movement is this environment that exists that is simultaneously claims to be a working class movement, but uses the language of academia and intellectualism, and in that it has an inherent classism and even racism because of the access to such terminology that is used. A lot of times we're always talking in the abstract, in the theoretical, and a lot of people, I think, particularly working class people of color, cannot relate to the abstract, to the theoretical. They want to see how it relates to the material of, you know, how it involves them in their everyday lives. And I think that among the left, it's a failure that we continue to do because we continue to look at the patriarchs and matriarchs of certain movements. We're always looking towards these icons that no particular, supposedly no more are the teachers of some sort, instead of creating an atmosphere where, despite all the rhetoric, I mean, of equality, that it actually is equal in the sense that we all have access to the same knowledge because it's using language that's accessible, concepts that are accessible. Like for instance, I think I just lost my thought, but I don't know, that's it.
It's like even to ask, I had another thought before that, but I want to ask you a question. Like, what's frustrating to me is like, I don't know what's accessible to someone else. Like, and then sometimes what is accessible to someone who comes from an entirely like different context than I am, whether it's like working class, I'm kind of working class, but like whether or not it's like, you know, an African American context, like what they are engaging in is not accessible to me, like all the time, or even a lot of times. And so like I don't even know how to be accessible, and I always feel really like intimidated and inadequate and like afraid of doing the wrong thing. So that's like one, like I don't know if you have a response to that. But the other side of that is like, I know from my own context of the things that I like feel, like it's always really frustrating to me when I'm dealing with like something, a situation, and I feel like my gender is a factor here. You know, like I feel like either like more like ashamed, and I think my gender might have something to do with that, or if I feel like someone is, you know, actually saying something that is offensive and sexist. Like, to me, the most important thing is for that other person to like shut up and listen to me for a little bit when I like try to explain that, and not to tell me how they're not actually being sexist, or like or whatever that is. And so like I know, a part of me knows like I need to be able to do that as well. It's just like I don't know. Like when you said, yeah, let's use language that's accessible, I just wanted to like, kind of say like, I don't even know what that language is, so I feel like most of the time I have to just be quiet. Like, because I can't say anything. Like I don't even know I haven't even figured out what someone else is saying yet. You know? So I don't know if that,
I can respond to the language aspect. I mean, I'm really a fan of John's critique of language and symbolic thought. And I would have loved us to just go past, you know, this language, beyond language, you know, away from language, away from civilization, away from state. But for the time being, we're here and we're dealing with them. And that's how we can communicate now. I totally hear the fact that a lot of the times, language is used, you know, lawyers, academics who believe in academia, you know, doctors, they'll just throw at you words that they know you don't know, and just go and buy medication, oh, you have the syndrome. So then you're like, oh, well, you know, what do you have to do? Like, you know, you're afraid of dying, you go and buy the medication. And then you find out, like, if you actually go to the dictionary, and there are dictionaries available, instead of rushing to the pharmacy, you go, you educate yourself, and you check, okay, what are they saying? So, you can educate yourself and use that language to free you within that space. I hung out with a lot of rappers in New York when I was doing my undergraduate in the early 90s, Philadelphia, New York. Okay, and I was amazed, like, coming from abroad, I just arrived in the United States in 1988, I didn't know anything about America. And you have like this image of, the people, the oppressed, Black Americans, they don't know English, Mexicans, they're just construction workers, don't talk to them in the language that we know, they won't get it. Well, that's talking down to them. I was amazed, like, the vocabulary, the notions that these kids in the hood knew is amazing. PhDs sometimes, don't know that. They can't use the language in that way. So I hear the fact that you would feel alienated and you would want to resent, but then resent the whole language. Take John's point. The whole language is oppressive. But at the same time, you are smart enough to know you don't need to go to university. That's another thing. The authority, that's a very good point that you raised. The authority that we end up trusting comes not with the fact that they use the language, but the fact that the structure of who is respected, whose knowledge and whose perspective is respected, that is the problem. And once you go and check in the dictionary, what does ontology mean? And you go on and talk. It's economical. Instead of saying a whole paragraph, well, I'm talking about how we view our genesis and coming into the world and our relationship with each other, you can use one word, ontology. And it's very easy to check. And use it. It will give you economy and power. And it's accessible. But the thing is that here we think, and I'm completely surprised because, in the Soviet Union, the real intellectual was like John, is like the one who refused to be an academic. That's the real thinker you trust, because he's not paid by the state, he's not doing it for that. Here, you trust somebody who got published. You trust somebody who did university. And so, yes, that is the oppression, because then, well, somebody who could afford to buy a degree can go and just tell you everything, and inadvertently, we all find ourselves kind of, oh, well, if he was published, it must be something in it. 90% of academic published work is crap, don't bother. So, that's...
I was just going to make a comment about the way we communicate with each other, like in our smaller groups and just in our network of friends, especially when we're talking about ideas that involve a lot of language. I think that I find myself getting intimidated a lot when we're having conversations because I have to fight to get an idea across. And I'm not the kind of person who's going to interrupt somebody else, but I often find that in conversations, people are very passionate, but that they don't, sometimes that's not the thing, that room isn't allowed for that conversation. And I don't necessarily, I don't want to say it's a gender thing, but I've noticed that what's happening is mostly all the men in the room are talking and all the women are quiet because they're not fighting for a place. And so I really appreciate just how things are stacked at this conference. It's very nice. But yeah. So I'm making a comment about sort of an intimidation that's totally, I think, unintentional.
Totally valid, because gender is also a construct of oppression.
Yeah.
So and who has the word?
Well, I agree with is I mean, the thing about trust is if you have different experiences in terms of crossing lines of color or gender, how can you get the trust if you don't share the experiences? I mean, I guess that's kind of obvious. I think we're going to talk about this a little tonight. Some of the developments in the anarchist thing. I haven't seen a lot of progress over the years, but I've seen a little, and it's kind of worth studying, I think. I mean, we know there were certain Black Panther Party people that are now anarchists who identify that way. I'm a little bit more familiar with the Indigenous connection and how that doesn't happen overnight. It does. It's a common effort for building trust and showing respect for that effort. For example, as an anarcho-primitivist, one thing you think is kind of obvious or simple, it isn't simple, but the connection in terms of respect for traditional ways of indigenous people, in terms of the integrity of their culture in general, if you come to the point of view of an indictment of domestication and civilization, you can see without too much effort that that's, well, it is for many of us a touchstone, a learning place of what has that meant and what has it meant when that's taken away. And so just in this past year, and I think we will get into this a little bit tonight, how there have been some, to me, pretty inspiring connections between mostly white anarchists, not completely, but and indigenous people in at least two places that stand out in the past year to me. And in terms of the privilege thing, you know, to me, it, in a way, another way to look at that from a whatever primitivist point of view, it comes to mean in a general sense is how many white middle-class people are in the foundries and in the mines all around this planet that makes the technology exist, that makes the whole techno-industrial machine function. And at the same time, we know, especially right now, that of course many people would count themselves lucky to have a job, and you were referring to that, as opposed to not having a job. And if we're talking about, if we're working toward or want to see a liberated, disalienated future for people in the world, then the model isn't industry. But as you say, well, it's easy to point that out and to have that critique and that vision, but what's step one and step two? Well, step one and step two, it seems to me, is respecting that instead of, as the left always does, and leftist anarchists too, those people, referring again to indigenous people, they need to progress to become workers and consumers and citizens. There's no respect for them not doing that, not wanting that. We don't want that. I don't want that. So you can see a connection there. Not that it makes anything automatic, but there's a basis there in terms of common values and some kind of common direction and respect, even though we don't have a shared experience. You know, it's tough, but it can be, there can be some movement there, I think.
I have a question. I guess, like, I was wondering, like, Nekeisha, have you had experiences, like, as an African American woman, like, how do you relate to even just, like, other African Americans, and is that difficult, or, like, do you feel like it's a disconnect too for you?
Right. Well, I'll just clarify sort of my self-identity in that I'm originally from Trinidad, so I would consider myself, I was born there, so I'm technically Trinidadian, and lived for the first 10 years of my life exactly what everybody in spaces like these is working really hard to try and figure out how to do. Just even sort of like modern processes of being colonized or domesticated. I mean, coming to America has definitely split me in many different ways. So I'm no longer connected to Trinidad in a way that is authentic, beyond having relatives there. I was assigned a category of being black that was not a category that I had before. I adopted a community then as a black person because I was seen that way, and so I know more about black history, black experience, etc., than I do about my Trinidadian history. And yet, because I've been on a particular trajectory, class-wise, education-wise, etc., it doesn't always feel like I can talk to people who don't share the same thing. So there's a lot of very bifurcated, very kind of cut up realities that I sort of navigate on a regular basis. So even part of admitting that it's hard to know how to, as an organizer, help to diversify the space in a way that is sustainable comes from the disconnect that I feel from all of those places as well. And so living in Elkhart, Indiana, where I am now, and getting to know people within my neighborhood whose experiences are very different from mine, and relating in a very kind of increasingly close way has been really helpful for training. And so, I mean, that would be some of the kind of the personal stuff that's going on there. But one of the things too that I was thinking is that what is so interesting about this movement, and what also makes the disconnection between some of these barriers so strange, is that so much of it is based on coming out of examples are within Indigenous and people of color spaces. I mean, a lot of anarcho-primitivist writing draws on Indigenous practices, categories, etc. You know, when people are trying to figure out how to use rain barrels, that's how we collected our water most of the time. You know, outhouses, done it. I mean, that was the daily. Growing our own food, my 80-year-old grandmother still does it. And so it's this weird kind of thing of being sucked out of something, but that's the important thing, and so I have to relearn stuff that I was doing when I was 4. And that a lot of our ancestors, probably regardless of whether they were Indigenous or people of color, were doing in generations past. And so then that makes it a weird space, because really who we need to be learning from, who I need to be learning from, who I am drawing information from, are not a part of the discussion, which is why some of the accessibility, the language stuff really, really troubles me, because really we're not, the language and the practices, we're borrowing from the people who we say might not understand. And so those are some of the things that are really kind of difficult to try and negotiate. Why is that happening, and how do we stop it from happening would be too trivial, but how do we work with that as people who are trying to be liberating people and liberated people?
Yeah, and actually that's a good point of liberated rather than liberating, because we don't have the right to go and liberate somebody, but we're obliged to listen to what they want and why they want it, to how they see their possibilities, and why don't they see others. And by knowing that, we would be also able, to have a choice either to go there or open the borders so they're free to go. So everybody can go. In the end, it's not a matter of, to use your metaphor, of me going. it should be really free. The space should be free for everybody to go, how to get beyond it. And the way that, unfortunately, resistance is forced to be constructed in this setting of really, it's a very capitalist, product economy. Knowledge becomes, paper and books. It's products. It doesn't matter, how people live behind those books or what people want. With the degree, people tell me, oh, I'm doing my PhD because I want to do my research, and that's the only way I can do my research as a woman of color, immigrant, is to be with the university. It's not because I'm buying into the university. It's not because I want to get a job with that degree. But it's no, that's you're coerced into doing it, and then you're coerced into continuing with it. How to split it up that we don't have to do that. That precisely knowledge and language and everything is available to everyone who doesn't want to be an academic or in that setting.
Could I ask a follow-up on the beginning of what you were saying about kind of going or not going, and related to what you were commenting earlier about burning bridges, and how that makes a difference in sort of how you go. I've been thinking a lot lately about making connections between sort of more radical or people who separate themselves out a bit more from sort of mainstream, and folks who are entrenched in the regular, sort of normal American life. Could you see as valid, going, and I mean, I don't know what example to use, but gathering people's stories in their own words, kind of thing, or videoing people and where they are and talking about their lives and communicating that to folks who wouldn't go there or don't know anything about those folks' context or anything. Is that valuable just in terms of then hearing them speaking in their own voices and and knowing something about another reality that the suburban white middle class is not going to otherwise have any connection with or care about or have. Does that make sense? I know it's very. I know I'm saying not speaking in the abstract, but when I hear you need to cut off and go, I'm well, is there any way that I can bridge or bring connection?
I mean, my ideal world is, without borders.
Sure.
Where you go, you interact. If you're a gatherer, you're not oppressing anyone. You're going gathering your berries and interacting with other gatherers who have different berries. You could share your stories. I've had amazing experiences when I didn't speak. I was in Japan and Hokkaido, didn't speak Japanese, and it's we could understand each other. We were sitting there camping, and in the wilderness we could understand each other beyond borders. It's possible. In this context, when you have the privilege of the military that's behind, that makes your space safe, without renouncing 100% that privilege, your going will never do good. Because the others don't have the same opportunity. It's not an exchange. It's you going and like a peep show. You can afford to have a peep show. And I was talking about, yesterday, for example, the refugees were escaping terrible situations, like the recent incident with the Somalis in the Mediterranean. They don't have the same opportunity to come to this country, photograph you, interview you, and go back and say, check this out, this is how they live, what can we do with it? No, they don't have to say that. So in this sense, that's what I'm saying. And there are some examples of people, and last year in Memphis, Iwari was more pessimistic. He said, well, still when you're captured, he was talking about Berman, I think. When you're captured and you're brought back, you still, regardless of how you change your name and how bearded or tattooed you are, you still have that white male privilege because you will not be treated the same as a black man or as a Somali who's rotting in a jail in Libya in the middle of the desert because he's not allowed to go anywhere. So,
They just assume that but I think I let other people say, wow, I didn't know that there were other people who were thinking this way, et cetera, et cetera. I would say that it might be a waste if that sort of boost of energy and ideas and networks and connections that people get in a space like this never translate into anything being done when you return or in your work and your relationships, et cetera, et cetera. When I get back, I don't tell my next door neighbor who might lose her house and is in a very difficult shape. Yeah, you should definitely come to the conference and learn how to resist banking structures or whatever. But it does give me a lens with which I understand her situation in a way that is different from people who adopt an American way of understanding the situation, which might blame her for where she's at. And I'm saying, no, I understand this structurally. This is not a bad person within this. And so this is revolutionary space, but it's not revolutionary. And so that's sort of how I would see the dialectic between a space like this and a space, and relating that to the space in where I am the other 363 days of the year.
One of the things I read recently is that really connected with me and made me think about some of this is beings of context. Like, we're beings of context, and we weren't meant to deal with all these abstractions and all the layers of identity and things that are placed on us. But you have to deal with that at the same time. It's a fact. It's like, I don't want to work, but how are you going to break out of this? So so it really is language and cognition that it's a struggle against. It's not the struggle against all these symbolic layers is really at the core of so much of this. And one of the things I was thinking about is the Russian social scientists in the Soviet era went to outlying areas and tried to just pin different cognition on the people. That was saying they had these tests where they were trying to bring numbered logic, Western logic, into these outlying groups and saying so they have these tests and say there are polar bears in Siberia, all the polar bears are white. And then they'd ask the people, okay, there are polar bears in Siberia, what color are they? And the people, they just wouldn't go along with that logic. They'd say, I don't know, you tell me, I've never been to Siberia. They could be brown, I don't know. And then they'd say, no, there are polar bears in Siberia. All the polar bears in Siberia are white. What color are the polar bears in Siberia? And they just they'd be like, just wouldn't go along with it. And I think to some extent, it's a process of undoing the logic that we've been just bashed over the head with. And some of that is resisting the identity that's placed on us, but at the same time not acting, not the cheap route of just saying it doesn't exist. But I think what we're really striving for are those moments of when we are unconscious, when that identity isn't what is between two people, when it's a pure intimacy that is really at the heart of our origins, you know, and as community, as people of context, knowing the other in very profound, deep way, not just in socialized roles.
My name's Allison. John is my husband, and we had the opportunity to go to India last year, and we were only with Indian people, and these particular Indian people who were in charge of everything, and we, you know, they held our fate in their hands, and we were with them all the time. And I think after about 2 weeks, we finally got to the point, and I think this is where it starts to happen, where they could make fun of us. And so what they said one time was, well, Americans always say thank you. You know, Indians don't. You know, we were floored. It's a cultural difference. Because in India, as they explained it, your friends and family do things for you. You do things for each other. There's no thank you. And then, get this, Americans always praise the food. You know, you're taught this stuff from the time you're a baby, to praise the food. But in India, if you praise the food, that's like, well, wasn't it good last time? You know, so anyway, so these cultural differences are so staggering, and it's so humbling to get to that point. So if you have the opportunity to make a friendship, and that could happen in the suburbs. It doesn't, you don't have to go to India. There's plenty of people from India living in the suburbs. But I think that it starts with friendship. When we make friends outside our communities, that's when there'll be more diversity at gatherings like this.
I guess one of the things that what Andrew was talking about too, about acceptance of a cultural identity which you have no choice over making. To me, anarchism is a lot about being able to experience something and have a real experience, a cognitive experience that you can understand under your own terms, and make those decisions for yourself or collectively, how you decide to work that. But it has to initially come down to the self and making the decision yourself. As a white male, in discussions about white male privilege, I hear these discussions a lot, and I understand that white male privilege absolutely exists, 100%. There's no denying that. What I see is a lack of understanding that what white male privilege is and what it is not, and how white males are also forced into this idea a lot of times, and we're trying to fight against it as well. I'm not looking for handouts from the power structure, and I'm not accepting the fact that I'm being given an in or an out. I don't want it. I don't care what they think, and I'm not going to assume that I do. But that being said, I think that as a white male, to understand how we can smash the white male patriarchy that exists and that hierarchical structure has to come from first an understanding of where our benefits come from. And if you have a perceived benefit, whether it's conscious or subconscious perceived benefit, you're going to defend that thing which benefits. That's just a natural way of existence. If you drink from a river, you'll defend the river. If you eat from a tree, you'll defend the tree. That's how we live and exist as beings that exist in a coexistent relationship with others. If we perceive a benefit from a white power structure, we're going to defend it. And you don't have to be white to defend a white power structure. That needs to be very well made clear as well. There's a lot of non-white people in this world that absolutely uphold a white power structure. But as a white male, within that white male power structure, the understanding for me had to come from the fact that I had to understand that I'm not, in fact, benefiting from this white power structure as a white man. There is no benefit to be had in having a second-hand experience thrust upon you in which you're forced to react in a way that which you have no natural understanding for. You have no basis to understand why you're dominant. You have no basis to understand what to do with that dominance or how to get rid of that dominance. So you have to understand that it's not beneficial in any way to you as a white male to be a part of the white male power structure. If it's not beneficial, then you have to understand that it's an attack. And if it's an attack, then you have to understand where the attack is coming from and how to fight back against it. But the first step has to come from understanding that you look for the benefit. And if you are receiving benefits from it, then you need to question if you're really getting those benefits and what those benefits are. I don't see it as a benefit to live in a first world, quote unquote, country where we still are breathing poison air and drinking poison water, just because I'm not under attack by getting sent to the gulags, and I don't have soldiers bulldozing my house and being told I can't go to certain schools, doesn't necessarily mean that I'm not under attack just because we happen to live in a home with other friends in a relatively safe area. Doesn't mean that our air isn't still being poisoned, our water isn't still poisoned, and the food and the shit that we see in advertising isn't still poisoned, it's not still an attack. So as one of the things I want to make, as we're talking about, is a picture of a little white kid holding up a sign that says, where are my benefits from the white power structure? And my point in making that poster is to illustrate that there is a white power structure and that you're not benefiting from it. Whether you're white or non-white, there is no benefit in that power structure. All there is oppression both ways. So that's just, I think that we talk about the white power structure a lot, the white male patriarchy, but we've never really gotten really deep into identity politics within our community, how to dissect that being white power.
I might respond briefly to that. I haven't responded yet, so just one thing you said I just like to...
Go ahead, Leslie.
Go ahead.
Somebody else do?
No, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Just to raise the question, you stated something as a fact, and I'd just like to problematize it slightly, make a question out of it, of whether we do necessarily, if it's human nature or natural or whatever, I'm not sure exactly what label you said, to defend something we're getting a privilege of. I'd like to suggest benefit. I'd like to suggest that the very nature of what, whether it's John the Baptist or Jesus is referring to as metanoia, repentance, is precisely to renounce that. You know, that it's not built into us, it's been socialized into us to do that, and that we do have a choice, and that's what it means to be a Christian, is to not accept the things that benefit us, but to look what benefits others.
Okay, for the context of this conversation, can we not necessarily relate to Christianity, because I don't feel like I want to colonize this idea of the conversation. My point in saying that is that as living beings, we will defend what benefits us, whether it's good or bad, if it's a perceived benefit. If we're receiving food, we're receiving water, we're receiving shelter, we're receiving...
Excuse me, what I would like to put in here is that I think this is a really rich conversation precisely because people come in with the knowledge of the space and the love that they feel comfortable with. And so if Wes wants to talk about Christianity, I think we should hear what his Christianity can say to us. Okay, so I don't want to shut people off, just because it doesn't speak to you. Open up and listen, and you will have a really fruitful dialogue, because what you have to say has merit, but so does the response. Okay?
I guess I just don't understand the context of Christianity, so it's...
So if you open up and listen, you will understand.
And I appreciate you naming that, Layla, although I don't feel the need to make it a Christian point. I'm just coming from the, Layla's coming from where she's coming from as someone who's Russian and Sudanese and everything else you are, and Nekeisha is from Trinidad. That's happens to be where I come from. I'm not holding it up as what anybody else should come from, although this is Jesus radicals, so it's not like it's a completely foreign thing to put in the conversation. So wherever that's coming from, all I'm raising is that we do have a choice. It's not necessarily built into us to defend something that benefits us. From whatever perspective that may be true for you, whether it's because it's what Jesus models for people or any other source, I don't want to accept as a given that we inherently defend what's a benefit to us. We choose to, and we can choose not to.
And it's also the perception of benefit.
Yeah.
So the definition of benefit, yes, a lot of people benefit, but what do they benefit? That's the question.
I'm sorry, what's your name?
I'm Michael.
Michael, I'm Andrew. I kind of just want to respond and expound on what you were getting at earlier about patriarchy and being a white male. And I understand what you're saying about Christianity. I think you were probably talking in the context of maybe universally white men, or just like white culture in general, because Christianity doesn't necessarily apply to that as a whole. But as a Christian, I do have to look at that through that lens. But as being a white male, what you were saying actually reminded me of a very offensive commercial I saw a number of years ago. I don't know if it was Burger King or whatever, but it was some commercial that was aligning men, specifically white men, with the necessary consumption of meat to identify with their masculinity. And there was a line in it, they were all out in the street dancing, hard hats on, they're all blue collar, and they said, "I'm tired of this chick food, no more tofu." And I don't know if you guys have seen that, but that was a very offensive ad, and it was identifying specifically white men with a certain kind of class, low income, with meat and a very unhealthy diet. And I don't know, what you were saying, it wasn't completely related, but it really kind of reminded me of that. How that just kind of spoke as a whole of like the way white males are supposed to be, they're supposed to behave in culture, and like how we're supposed to be sports fanatics and drink cheap beer and consume meat because that identifies our masculinity.
I need to break in for 1 second because we weren't paying attention to the time. And I want us to continue this discussion, but I also want to let people know that there are workshops, that the workshop time is happening, that Peter's workshop. So I think we closed with the comments about
7 water and 2 lemon?
Just television commercial that was sort of dictating male pattern that it should be.
Do you have enough people that help?
And we had other people. Oh yes, oh yeah.
Well, I kind of wanted to say when Michael was here. He said something like the first thing that we need to do to like dismantle white privilege.
And this smells like it had a quantity of garlic in it.
I think that the first thing we
Did
need
it?
to do
Yep.
is like to have some humility. That seems like
Interesting. So it's just straight lentils, nothing else.
and especially the people like in power that hold those positions, whether they're, whether they want it or not, it's that to just be quiet and listen and not like lies.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
There we are.
Also to realize that we aren't like really the experts on anarchism. That I've found
I think
when I hang out with people that are like, in they already know these ideas really well. They are like natural anarchists. They know how to have community way better than we do.
and then we were just using
that we have so much to learn from those people. Whoever they are. So,
shifted
we
around.
can talk about these these ideas and how do we include these people? I don't know, maybe it would be like how do I get included into their concept?
So let's do all this.
If I can just go on, just to make clear, actually when I'm talking about opening the door, I'm not talking about breaking the door, I'm not talking about including the door. Did you watch this off?
Yeah, about
I'm talking about
it's actually
real life. And
yeah.
yes, the underprivileged, social privileged classes are aware of these ideas. But the problem is actually how do we get beyond the fact that, okay, well, it's all fine, we're all aware.
So,
And we know
how many
our library
cups of
research,
lentils do we
they
want?
know it because they work in factories. Okay?
I mean, how many?
Where do we go from there? How do we invite them in the space where they feel safe to go and fight, not to be in that situation, not to want jobs instead of wanting freedom?
Right, yeah.
How do we get that? How do we invite them to work
Yes. So I was using
And we don't live
red cups, but you can find some people are really good at eyeballing that as well. So kind of your call on how. I mean, it goes pretty well. More water, better than less.
Yeah.
So that's probably the closest one.
I just okay, we're gonna be just a bit of right now. I have my number. So if you guys need anything,
I think it's obvious.
Oh, and then also, I don't know if you're about reading a combos. And then yeah, I'll be back next.
The reality is the world we live in, we all live in, like the world
And you did your experience.
You can be the supervisor, Hannah.
basically benefits not.
What's it like to supervise anarchy? Herding cats?
I said that last night, and somebody said, the way I understand,
I never heard that before.
The way I understood, he meant it, and I disagree with a lot of the vocabulary. I don't know if it's vocabulary term. He meant it in that way. It's not very interesting. But anyway, the benefit, it's the same as choice. You know, you don't benefit in the sense of, vote, like, what the anarchists say, having this commercial of, you benefit with big, white, male eating meat. Okay? But there are benefits in ascribing to that identity, to that group of persons. So the benefit is still there, even though, of course, it's totally unhealthy, it's totally oppressive, it oppresses you, it oppresses the people you love. You can never have healthy relationships with anybody. But there are these little benefits, and seeing the scope that, and that's what the choice is. I have a choice to be a black woman or a white male. Well, I have this little choice. I don't have a choice to be every spirit. So I'm going to, or at least I have a choice, so I'll choose to be a white male and I have my different benefits. In that sense, then it works. And that's the really difficult part to get out. And the notion of identity, because Angie mentioned it in my talk, the problem I find is that in this communal identity, the goal is identity. We have to get rid of thinking ourselves that we have any kind of identity, human identity. We shouldn't have identity. We are just living spirits and creatures like everybody else. And then we will maybe add humility, because then we become one whole. Well, I'm just like this spirit like everybody else. Then you get your identity, maybe you start receiving the benefits that you saw in identity and not in your identity. That's like my
Yeah, I think that although we live in this world and system where there are certain material benefits to ultimately it's a construct. I mean, it's really, really construct in this country.
I think that's about where it is.
Identities in the way they might shop or something like that, and or how they get things to come in. So
So again, you know, I mentioned that there's not real material consequences to the identities that were given or can choose, but ultimately the fact is that I think we need to stasis, I guess, in a lot of ways, we're getting so wrapped up in our own social categories, which, you know, again, as a kind of every day, it's easy to work through them, because like that's what we do, you know, when you're eliminating your idea of captive liberation, you're eliminating the idea that my emancipation is not like emancipation is not like animal emancipation is not like, you know, so it's like whatever, you know, so being able to give two identities that you move, you know, not just with the once you figure it out, all of a sudden you have very things to say you're done, you know, it's just like it's work collective, very much about your own.
I wasn't here for the beginning part of the conversation, but I just want to share a little bit about I've had an interest in anarchism for a long time, but I also feel like really polarized from like anarchist culture, and my critique for that culture is like the same, actually very similar to my critique for Christian culture, church culture, that just feels very polarizing. And I was just thinking about why that is, and like thinking about what you were talking about, and how like why is it that the anarchist culture is so much like white people from privilege, and doesn't feel inclusive for people like me who come from poverty? And I just wonder, I think that having, it's very ideological, and it's very like heady and cerebral, and those ideas have to do with, a lot of the ideas are like, if this scenario were to happen, or like our idea would be this, and like isn't really speaking to like our present condition, which is also like my critique of the church, you know? And that when it comes down to, well, how does, I think for a person from privilege, like having those conversations, like actually just being an anarchist emancipates you from your position in the society in a way. And so like it already addresses the ways that like you are being oppressed by the society, by the system. But for a poor person or a person of color, it's not, having an anarchist, subscribing to anarchist ideology isn't going to make a difference for us whether or not we're in our position. We are still in the same position in the society in the present day. And so I think what we need from the anarchist community, or like from the church community, I know I'm not saying this applies to everyone at all, but just like generally as like a cultural overarching pitfall, I think that I need it to speak to like my reality right now and help emancipate me from what I'm experiencing in my life. And I feel like in anarchist culture and in Christian culture, there's an unwillingness to engage with those issues. So like in my own church, there's a lot of talk about our ideal society, about like shifting paradigms, about shifting power dynamics, blah blah blah. But when it comes down to like issues that affect my day-to-day, about housing, about like political issues, like they don't want to touch it. And I think that sometimes we experience a similar thing in anarchist culture, where it's like, screw all that stuff, screw labels and screw public housing and screw jobs, because I've already been emancipated from my privilege by my anarchist ideology. Why won't you subscribe to it? You hear what I'm saying there, of like how that can be, I'm not saying that that's what you guys are saying, but yeah.
Sure. The kingdom of God and the revolution.
Like it actually needs to, I mean, this is why we really need to like actually have leadership from people who are in the not in positions of power too.
Well, I just want to tack on to what she was saying and really like affirm what you just said, because I was just thinking I've really had a strong frustration all day today, because I feel like all I've heard is people talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. You know, and for us, where we come from, the reason we're here is because we want to know what other people are doing and how you actually function every day as a Christian anarchist, whatever. We can say that we're Christian anarchists all day long and have these ideals, but I just don't feel like, personally, I'm doing a very good job of living that out. And so just when we kind of see what does that look like as far as everyday choices and things like that? Like a practical discussion.
One of the things that I'll say, and it's always a frustrating response, is that in some ways I'm drawn to that question, but I also resist that question because it seems to be asking, and I don't know that you're asking it, but we sometimes, well, two of the other pitfalls I would say is that sometimes we move really quick to do. And part of this discussion is that there's sometimes a lot of doing, but doing without thinking or thinking without doing repeats a lot of mistakes. And the other sort of pitfall too, I think sometimes is that people want, I mean, I know that that's a good counsel for us as we go, that there needs to be more storytelling, or as much storytelling as there is more theologizing or helping us sort of reimagine the kind of context we're in. There also needs to be more storytelling too. But I also think too that sometimes people come wanting answers really easily. And again, I'm not saying that that's you all, and that's hard to navigate. Because how we, in Elkhart, I don't call it anarchism when I'm in Elkhart necessarily, but what I understand it in that way. And so anarchism with the people that I relate to looks like gardening, looks like summer academy for children, looks like people living in community, looks like people not voting or whatever. And none of that's just terribly exciting too, like people want to figure out, what are you doing?
That's the kind of stuff I'm
and I'm like, well, what I'm doing is working as a graphic designer and trying to do anti-racist communication training.
Yeah.
That's anarchist to me. And so some of it is a process of discovery, but I do think that we like as an organizer or as organizers can do more to help people imagine maybe.
I've been wearing, I don't know if people, how many people know, but probably a lot of them wearing last couple of days these Catholic worker t-shirts. Dorothy Day, whose quote is on here, love is, the only solution is love, thought of herself as a Christian anarchist back in the 1930s, 40s.
50s.
She also said love is an action, by the way.
Yeah,
that's also
I'm quoting from
Dorothy Day.
Dostoevsky, quoting from Father Zosima.
Right.
But anyway, and similarly to what you're saying, Nekeisha, meant cleaning toilets, making soup, taking in people that the police dropped at her doorstep because they didn't want them to jails because they were bleeding or had other bodily fluids coming out of them that were ugly and messy, and they thought she could take care of it better than the police could. So that's the inspiration for me. Some of what that means, for example, is that my wife Sue over here is my ministry is not a 501c3 organization. It means that we don't pay a salary for what we do. It means that as we work with the local homeless people, we refuse everybody's sense that we should take money from the government or institutional churches or all those things to make it more effective and expand it. And we just keep making those kinds of choices to say, no, we're not going to get entangled with all that stuff. We're going to keep it as local and personal and relational as we can to fight that temptation every moment, every day.
But you still do get money. And what I hear from them, and I'm really happy you two came and spoke out, because it's exactly, this is what I want to hear, how people who don't have even the possibility to help anybody because they're completely oppressed. Proudhon's question, Pierre Proudhon, what's property, that's theft. We are all stuck paying rent. We need to go to the store. Like even to have a garden, you need to buy seeds. You need to buy, you need to consume. These are the structures who feed the landlord and feed the production of knowledge, the industry, how we live. So, I mean, I hear what you're saying. It's, you know, it's great that you're doing that, but at the same time, you are privileged to be doing that.
Of course I am.
And so how do we open it to the fact that, you know, they don't have to come to your place because, like, you know, they're bleeding and the police can't take care of them. How to make it that they have a garden and open doors as well. Yeah, I mean, that is the question. It's really important, you know, to find out how we're going to make it a really free society for everyone. Yes.
Oh, I just wanted to say that I would say that what he's talking about is very much addresses what I was raising, because in the Catholic worker community, there's no trouble with finding poor people and people of color to support that movement. Like they're already, there's not a problem there because it's already, they've already figured out how to incorporate these ideas into something that's tangible. And so I would say the Catholic worker model is one model that's a really great model for that. And I just, when people start talking about like anarchist ideology and like how do we get more people to think this way, I would encourage people to say like how do we like incorporate this into our actions, like how does this translate into the body?
But that's a band-aid to the bleeding poor problem now. It doesn't address the fact that there are poor people who can't take, like, they're completely disempowered to take care of themselves and they need to be dropped off at somebody else's. You know? I don't want to be in a position to go and ask for bread, you know, to come to West and knock on his door and tell him feed me. I don't want to be in that position. You know, so it doesn't respond. It helps right now with the fact that it's great that Dorothy Day was doing that. It's great that, you know, that the people that the police couldn't take care of were dropped off at her place. How to eradicate the bleeding poor in the hands of the police? This is my question.
Yeah. I mean, I think Catholic worker works on those things.
I was just going to say that's why ideology is useful. There is a use to it. You know, even though it seems like it's not addressing right now. Why? I mean, we just have to do everything at once.
I mean, it can be. Just sometimes it isn't.
Okay, with that, a lot of.
Well, just briefly, I mean, the ideas you have are what tell you what to do or not to do. I mean, the priorities you might have. And I just want to throw out, what if there isn't anything you can do within the system? Or to put it another way, if you could do all the things you want to do as a radical, then you wouldn't be radical. In other words, the society, you wouldn't need to radically change something. And, you know, I'm not trying to make it impossible because I think we can all think of a lot of different things people do, all kinds of stuff. This morning, Ray Arrow was here talking about having done a bunch of arsons. And you know, the funny thing about that, it struck me, and I'll just throw this out here, what he did, in my opinion, was very marvelous and courageous, and I have a lot of respect, and on my radio show every week, I applaud that stuff. People go out there and risk their total freedom to do something like that, something outside the system. He and others have tried working with us as a system. He made that clear. Didn't work. He made that decision. But at the same time, by the way, I was kind of amazed at how non-radical his ideas were. Really. I mean, I love the guy, but, you know, be nicer, shop better, I mean, that's kind of, you were willing to burn stuff down, and that's all you got? I mean, you know, again, I'm not trying to trash him, but it's the picture we have of where we want to go, and some things are not that possible on a daily basis. I mean, there are a lot of wonderful things people do on what I would call kind of a social work basis. I'm glad people are doing that. They're very lovely people. But then there are other things too. I mean, you know, there are people among the primitives, for example, they're out there on the land. You know, what did the indigenous people eat? How can we maybe move to horticulture as the first step, or maybe the last step, I don't know, but, you know, to feed ourselves in a way that isn't destroying the land. And, you know, all kinds of different projects, including what Trejo did. I mean, that's happening in different places. It's happening a lot in Mexico right now. You know, burn down a McDonald's. That's what I want to do. I mean, whoever is doing it, you know, that's, and they explain why. You know, they communicate. This is why, and it can be very instructive. And not that everybody's going to go do that, of course, you know, but so there are all these different choices, and some of them are not within the system at all.
I was just going to say, from living at the Catholic Worker for 3 years, I just found that it's kind of the death knell for Christian anarchists. I feel like it's the Catholic Worker, and the time that I was there, talking about a lot of things that have just started coming up at these conferences. It was always just plowed under by saying that's not what we do. It's not our tradition. It's Dorothy Day. It's Peter Moore. And then just the institutional aspect of the Catholic Worker, I think, is a total dead end, and really has a bunch of connections to leftist stuff that just really needs to be done away with. And that was my experience with the Catholic Worker.
Well, I think really quick, just to respond to that. I mean, you know, not everybody here is going to say, you know, I'm a Trotskyist, but I mean, Trotsky's idea of continual revolution, you know, I think is a really useful concept in that, you know, if we look at kind of whether it was the Soviet Union that was seen as kind of like the revolution has happened here and now we can move on to somewhere else, like this spot's done, move over here, you know, and then take care of this place, and then we'll move over here, as opposed to like, you know what, like the revolution's happening, it's happening, it's happening, it's happening. It happens when I wash the dishes when nobody asked. It happens when I take care of that bleeding homeless person. It happens now, and it happens when I firebomb this or do that. And I think kind of that idea of when we look to this institution, whether it's the Catholic Worker or Wes is dead and in the ground, and we pick up where he left off. Sorry, Wes. But as soon as we start treating these things as somehow liberated, like patches of space, these institutions have been liberated, and now we can move on to somewhere else, as opposed to like we need to constantly be liberating not just ourselves, the spaces we inhabit, the institutions we inhabit. Like, I think that at least what I'm hearing from a large chunk of people is that once we get in this space, and this space is now the liberated space, that's where it dies. You know, you think about the shark. When the shark stops moving, it's dead. I think the liberation's the same way.
Yeah, I actually want to connect what you were just talking about with what you said a little while ago. You were mentioning where you came from, kind of more like poverty, and then you mentioned like the privilege and all that. And I don't disagree with those things, but I do see those as definitions created by society, and I think they're just sort of illusions. Like the idea of poverty, or the idea of the privilege, or the ideas of class. Like, I think that the more concentration of wealth into like a class or an individual, the more isolated they are, and so there's less actual community. And then when you take someone or that group of people who are quote unquote impoverished, that actually creates community, because it creates the exchange of knowledge. Things like money or ownership of this or that, or being in the rat race, don't have any place anymore. So I see things as like poverty kind of spurring on action. Like what you guys were saying, like you want the conversion of concept into action, and then the conversion of action into, you know, a lifestyle. I think it's like recognizing, you know, illusions, things such as like class, or the ideas of privilege versus poverty, and it all has to do with like knowledge and community.
Can I just
I want to also make sure too, I know that there are people outside of the circle, and so if there are voices, well, number one, feel free to come inside the circle. We can make room. But, you know, and also feel free to like If you want to be outside the circle, that's okay. I know that there are people who
You must get part of the circle.
Yeah, well, I wanted to respond to the notion of community, and what I keep hearing is, what I understand is that your understanding of community is with people. And when I talk about breaking out of our identity, out of our knowledge structure, is that our community is with everything that lives. Think of the skunks, the bears, you know, the dying out species. How are we going to build community? So it's not like, let's get out of the structures that segregate us with our identities. The blacks, the Asians, the humans, you know, the cats, the purebreds, the domesticated, the wild. How do we build community outside of this identity for everyone, including the skunks and the squirrels and the birds and everything? So, you know, this is what I would like to, you know, to hear as well.
That's what I think, like, especially as like primitivists and stuff, like we do need to be outside a lot more. And like I don't live in houses, I live outside, and I'm just traveling homeless, but like I really like sleeping on private property and having the cops yell at me. And like I just feel like people talk about like liberating the spaces and having like community at these places, but like community at a place means like people have to go in, and certain people have to go in the place. Like I like the idea of like outside being a place where there's community, and like outside is where the world is, and like I feel like we need to do more things outside and like have place less importance on like one particular space. It's like the whole world is ours. Like it's every creature on the earth. It's all our earth, and like I want to stay on it. Like, I don't want to be like separated from it. I think that like, I don't know, there's a real big sense of community amongst other homeless kids. Like, when we see each other, we're all outside, so we're kind of smarted to each other. And, you know, there's a big sense of community there. I just feel like it's people need to go outside
Oh, somebody else.
Well, you know, as I listen to, you know, people from different perspectives talk about, you know, what happens, it also reminds me that I think in our experiences, surprising things will happen. And, you know, part of that discovery as I look at my own experience, you know, just where I was, you know, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, some of those experiences and changes in my life have been extremely surprising. And I think the way that it would manifest in each of our actions and each of our spheres of influence are going to kind of tend to be different and going to transition over time. And I think, you know, I mean, you know, when I think like what's going on in Afghanistan and the war struggles and peace activists and all the different actions that have been taken, you know, something like surprising is like this, you know, Private Manning person is one person, you know, he's in the military, he's working at his desk or whatever, and he's reviewing all this material, and he, in his own space and his own conscious and mind, starts, you know, using his life experience, reflecting on this material, and ends up taking an action that's, you know, really has a surprising, you know, impact on the whole world as he releases passes this information on to WikiLeaks, and that's a whole nother story to be discussed. But, I think that there's just really tremendously surprising things that happen in our experiences in terms of, like this one person's, courageous action, and, I don't know all the details, none of us do what's, really went on in his mind, but the impact that it ended up having was, profound beyond what many, thousands of people in collective action would have done in comparison. Those surprises are out there in our own personal experiences and in a global level. And I think that, also reminds me of that going back to Jesus. Here you have an insignificant Jewish peasant of no consequence in the Roman Empire, through his action and through what happened to him, ended up turning the world's values upside down.
I just wanted to clarify a little bit what my critique was, because I don't think I expressed it the way that I wanted to. But I guess the part that I'm critical about is when people are saying, how do I get more people who are in these circumstances of oppression to subscribe to my ideology? I really think that's the wrong question. I think that's a bad question, and it's not a helpful question. The question that we need to be asking is, how do I put my ideology into practice? What does that look like today? And Peter Morin was an idea guy, okay? I don't know how much people, I don't want to get sidetracked totally talking about Catholic rigor, but I think it's a good example that we can look at as like, this is one thing that some people did. Okay, so Peter Morin was like, he was still a philosopher, and he like wrote, that's mostly what he did. And Dorothy Day was making soup, okay? But Peter Morin wasn't saying, why don't more people agree with my ideas? He wasn't saying, how do I get people of color to agree with my ideas, or how do I get poor people to, they didn't care. They were out there, he was putting his ideas out there because they were true, and so he was speaking truth. She was putting them into practice because that's love, right? Speaking truth in love, that's what they were doing. And so I guess that's what I was trying to address, is that I don't think the question is really about how do we get more people to think this way. I think that the question is really a question, and asking the question of how do I put my ideology, what does my ideology look like right now, will draw us into action, and will hopefully draw us into action that serves people who are experiencing all those things. Those people may not identify as anarchist or ever identify as anarchist, or they may not identify as Christian or ever identify as Christian, and that's not important. Because the important thing is that,
Well, you're also misrepresenting the question here. It's not about how we're going to. We have an ideology, and hey, we want you, the poor people, to come and subscribe to us.
Right.
The question is, well, maybe some people are happy to be slave owners, and maybe some people are happy to be slaves.
Yeah.
Okay. I did research on sadomasochism, and that appeared to be the case. Okay, but it's an illness. So they're in pain, and they love pain. So it's not a matter of them subscribing to my ideology. It's a matter of what am I doing that creates a structure that people love pain. That they are so much in pain that they don't see any other way of living in this world without this pain. Yeah? So, it's a very different thing. Talking about liberating poor people, I don't have a recipe for how, everybody should live. I made certain choices within the possibility of choice. I chose certain options, but I didn't choose what I would really love when I chosen. I don't have that option. But I'm dreaming of that option. And when I see others that they don't even have the possibility of dreaming, I want to hear why. And it's fine, if that really, really, really speaks to you. But you observe the biodiversity in the world. Animals don't choose to be in pain, but humans do, and it's not a choice. So that this is just
I don't know, I think it kind of just like shuts people down to say like, oh, there's these people over here and like they're so tied in with like their 80-hour work week that like they can't even see beyond that and they can't dream beyond that. Like I don't think that's real. Like obviously there's plenty of people, both privileged and non-privileged, who can't see beyond their day-to-day life. But I don't think we can say that like just because these people are oppressed or just because they're busy, like then they're like, I just want a raise, like I just want a job, like this is why I'm coming to the States. Like I don't know. I feel like I've known a lot of people who, you know, whether they work, you know, 3 jobs and they have like tons of kids, like I still know people who show up to meetings, you know, they'll like come and they'll give their input and they'll like push their like 3 kids in a stroller for 2 miles to like learn about urban gardening. And like, I mean, I'm not saying that's the norm or that like we should like demand that of people, but like I don't think we should also like expect the opposite and like expect that like you can't see beyond their circumstance. Like I think a lot of people can, and like
have you been in the space between, in the border between Ethiopia and Sudan? Have you spoken to the people there and have you asked like what that was? They don't dream. They know they're going to find new places. So, you know, when I'm speaking about it, I come from there, I've been there. I've been on the border between Thailand and Burma, what's it called now? What's it called?
Myanmar?
Well, I mean, I've met like
okay, no, but they're there for life in this neutral zone. They're not allowed, United Nations knows about it, but nobody else does. They're not allowed to go into Thailand, they're not allowed to go into Myanmar. Okay? And they don't dream. They know they're going to die there, in that river, in that neutral territory. So, but having come from there, I'm also oppressed by, you know, all this structure of privilege. But at least I dream. And I've left people who died and who don't have that. So, you know, it's like, it's even a privilege. I'm not attacking you personally, but for you to even think that way is a privilege. That shuts the door immediately because inadvertently, without you wanting it, without you, you know, but it shuts the door to the others.
I think you're saying not there's no people who experience oppression who don't have hope. That's not what she's saying. What she's saying is there are people who experience oppression and don't have any hope. So you guys, I don't think that you're actually in disagreement because you're saying there are people who have hope even though experiencing oppression, and there are. But what do we do about people who are hopeless?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying there aren't.
And that, you know, this idea of freedom becomes an impossible thing because, you know, the system is so well structured that, you know, white males with authority, white males without authority, white males who stuck with hamburgers, you know, like the commercial we talked about, the immigrants who didn't have the chance to dream, but then suddenly United Nations gives like a few visas and they find themselves in Sweden or in Minnesota or, you know, whatever. And what do they want? They want to be these little pegs in that system because they know that otherwise they would be dead there. And so they will come here and keep the structure going. So again, like I said, you know, it's fine if it really, like if you really have a choice, okay, I want to go into the jungle, but I really want to be a slave here, then, you know, that's fine, but they don't have that choice. How do we make the choice available to really go, like, and the fact that there are these little pegs in the system, all of them, the slaves, you know, the really oppressed, the dying, you know, and, you know, the whole ladder up, encroaches and eats of the globe and leaves no space for this diverse community, the wilderness, you know, where, you know, people and creatures want to exist just for themselves, just because they want to be there, not because they want to be there, you know? So So it's something I would like everybody to think about, and no easy answers, lots of questions, very good questions, all of you, about how we can actually make it happen. We have different experiences and, brainstorm.
I came in late, so I might have missed this part already, but it seems like my experiences in life, I've been in a lot of pain. Long story, I don't need to go into it right now. We're all human, we've all been through a lot of pain. And from my experience, that pain is one of the best teachers in my life. And it never goes on my schedule. And it's not to the rush that I'd like. And when I went through that pain, the more that I would talk to people about it, and be like, oh, I'm going through this pain, more and more I was by myself. And it's painful. And so there's a lot of people in a lot of pain right now. I think the beauty of this, all of us sitting here together, being able to share ideas, we're blessed with the opportunity of that. So I know there's pain in a lot of parts of the world. So let's dig deep and dream. And my suggestion from my perception where I've been is working on my inner balance, because it's very easy to say, my brother is this and this and that, or do you see what my sister is this and that? And it's very easy to go to the outside into this situation. And those guys are there, and these ones are here in our different categories, in our different races, and all these. We're on a deeper level, like, what if it only lasts 5 more minutes? What if it only lasts 10, 100 more years? What's most important? God. And that's what I ask myself is that. Does being right even matter to me completely? Does, or this experience, like I was thinking, I'd like to pose the idea of a group hug of all these beautiful people here, but I don't know any of you, so I don't want to offend people. Someone might have been touched the wrong way when they were younger, or someone might have been abused by another person, or someone might be offended by my smell. So I don't want to propose the idea of a group hug, because I don't want to offend people. But then, it's something I believe in, is I don't know if human beings touch each other enough, and not in any inappropriate way, but in a way of saying, I love and appreciate every single one of you. So thanks for letting me share that. And start small, and who cares about how big and how long and how far, and all the complicated tunnels of counting ourselves up as knots, when really the most important thing is this experience right here, and what we take home with that, and what we share with our communities, and what we share with our families, and what communications we build and grow off of that. Thank you.
Yeah, I really resonate strongly with what John said there. For me, my anarchism begins with a very personal look at my own life. And if I look at my life as a field, and I'm standing in the middle of it, and I see people up here on a hill in that field, and people down here, something's wrong with that field. It's not a level field. So I have to make the adjustment in my own mind about how I'm going to deal with people every day, so that I'm not looking at them as either above me or below me. And that we're all essentially, it's the only way justice can be distributed, is if it's a level playing field. Now, when it comes to changing structures, I have a real problem with ideology, because I think ideology is part of our problem. Our ideologies are like churches, church institutions, which were a way of kind of dividing the pure from the impure. Well, there's something wrong with that idea of, that puts people above and below again on my playing field. I don't want to do that. So I'm very cautious about ideology. I think the only ideology that drives me is keeping it level and somehow being able to dispense justice in whatever way I'm able to do that equally around. and seeing that people are restored as well. So there's that restorative justice aspect. And that doesn't mean that I am out there necessarily providing food for the poor or a clothes closet. No, by restorative justice, I'm going to do what I can to make sure that people are being dealt with on an equal basis. And that may mean changing systems, and it certainly does in this situation.
A friend of mine asked me a question a week ago about anarcho-primitivism, and I said, I don't know, I'll ask John Zerzan, so I was wondering if I could do that now. And maybe it's all going to see later. It sounds like a really stupid question. But yeah, he was asking me, like, what the hell's the difference, like, why is it that, like a skyscraper, what's the difference between that and just like a beaver making a game or a bird's nest? And obviously it sounds like a ridiculous question, but I just like to hear, like, where does something go from being like wild into like human progress? Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
John hasn't spoken much, so.
What do you mean, historically, or in what sense?
I'm curious.
One thing that came to mind when we were talking about, well, part of the discussion about privilege is who's in the mines? Who's going to go down in the mine? Probably nobody in this room. Not me. So in other words, you don't have a skyscraper unless you force people to do the toxic grunt labor around the world. And that's kind of like it's more than a philosophical question, but it's a question of orientation. If you're an anarchist or if you have a vision of a just world. In other words, and it does get down to, I think, fundamental institutions like division of labor and domestication. Mining, and when did that appear and why, and how is it correlated to inequality and oppression? And, it doesn't, like anything else, it doesn't just float down from the sky. I mean, all of these things are embedded there, all the blood of people and the natural world and the whole thing to get the skyscraper. And now, astoundingly, I've seen this, we saw this in, well, you can see it in any country, I guess, really. Green skyscrapers. It's green and sustainable. Steel factories.
It's painted green.
Yeah. It's just such an astounding lie. I mean, there's nothing, there couldn't be anything remotely green or sustainable. It's just bullshit to say that. You can deconstruct it very simply. The beaver does it as part of their lives. I mean, they're not
beavers. There's no chief beaver beating up the other beavers to get his dam built.
Like where coercion begins is what you're saying.
Say again?
Where coercion begins is where nature stops.
Right.
And a lot of us see that the domestication thing, more people agree and explore that or are exploring it. That's the pivotal thing. People live freely in nature, generally speaking, and then they decide to control nature. They decide to distort from nature instead of taking what nature gives. It's human. And that rapidly you get cities, empires, temples, war, the whole oppressive thing, just slavery and the whole bag. And then after a while it gets skyscrapers out of
I want to respond to this one. Yeah, since the question was to both, to respond to me the difference between civilization, domestication, and the wilderness, I define them, is actually how you know yourself and the world is going to define what you're going to do. So if you know the world as existing for you, as your resource, that's entering the mode of domestication and consumption. And you consume the time, the lives, that's how you define the resources. That's why we have even human resources. I mean, apart from crops and plants and animals, we used to have slaves, now they're called human resources. So, and in wilderness, it's not like, all perfect. There have been some, ecological crashes, a few, historical. But still, in all of this biodiversity, in all of the dangers that exist, they are so minimal compared to the fact when in domestication your whole life is in danger because you'll be consumed by somebody who knows you as his or her forced labor or food or something that they provide. So a lion would eat a gazelle, but the lion does not know all the gazelles as the resource. So that's like the big difference. And so the lion will never eat all the gazelles because the gazelles exist there for themselves. But every now and then one lion will go and catch one gazelle and they'll share it. So it's a very, but civilization, domestication enters the mode when if you know that, that's what you make the whole existence of the gazelles or the cows or the dogs there to serve you and your interest because you're the owner and the consumer, even though the vocabulary changes. So it's like, it has a radical, so that's why, undigging knowledge, how we know, it's very, very important. It's not just talking about ideology. It's not about going and imposing it on somebody else, but it's about really undoing how we know to be in this world and how we want to be. And obviously, this system is not working. So if there have been a few catastrophes in the, in the history of, the dinosaurs somehow died out, do we perceive, are we the disease that's going to do the same, the fifth catastrophe? Or are we going to be the forces that keep the biodiversity? Are we the, do we want to conceive ourselves as a virus, as a cancer, as, like this radical nuclear meteor that's going to, is that how we know ourselves to be? Is that our goal? Or is it going to be part of the lions and the gazelles and the bears and the birds and the plants? So, that's basically what I was.
I want to volunteer for somebody who hasn't spoken yet.
There was a quote in this conversation by Dieter Bonhoeffer, somewhere along the lines of the person who loves their idea of community destroys community, the person who loves creates community. It kind of goes back to the sense of we're not like how do we live a life that actually comes from a foundation of love and not our ideas and make it about what we want and what we can get out of the situation. And the driving force behind that, the motivation is what love or whatever, as you can see, you can take us in different directions, but nevertheless, I think that's kind of what's lacking. Part of my story is I ended up, I'm a former pastor that essentially was removed for being an anarchist, which is kind of interesting because I didn't realize I was. Anyway, it was just kind of a series of things, it was just a shady situation, and
there should be more of those.
And which part? So I guess, and we're trying to do like this experimental community that's based on, it's a youth center, and it's based on that one quote essentially. And how can we come together as a young generations and learn what it means to wrestle through community and to be community instead of having all the laws and the rules and the policies and the bylaws and the stuff on the wall. You know what I mean? So and I guess for me, as I listen to these different experiences and stories, I'm more interested in the imagination and creativity of other people to say this is what we're trying to do, this is where we failed, and this is what became, or vice versa. I know for me, that's empowering in the sense of, because here we have young people who are trying to say, okay, how are we going to do this? What are we going to be? What are we going to put first? And how do we actually reconcile instead of zero tolerance or 3 strikes and you're out or whatever? You know what I mean? So for me, it's like as I try and understand what it means, I'm not so sure that it can happen on a structured large scale, because as soon as it does, that's almost when I need to walk away because we're just going to end up ending up like another, I don't know. So I really wrestle with if it's possible to have a civilization of this period that is on such a large scale.
Okay. Yeah, sorry. We're trying to get the people who haven't gotten a chance to speak since we're almost out of time too.
Well, I'll speak quickly. You know, I find it interesting that so many people that are here, you know, when we had the sing-along yesterday with people that had sung This Little Light of Mine, were people that grew up in a Christian tradition but have found ourselves disenfranchised from it and don't want to divorce ourselves from it. And something that I've continued to think about this weekend is that Christian anarchy, for those of us that are Christian and anarchists, that can be a protest from a church that we grew up in and now are bitter about and resent, or it can be a witness to a mainstream church that might think that we're nut jobs, but we still have the doors open to invite them to the table with us. And it's my personality to see Christians that drive Hummers or voted for Sarah Palin and still have a sticker on their car just to say, flip them off, we'll never understand. But if the love only exists within ourselves, then we can be as fundamentalist as our conservative counterparts and as sectarian. And I hope that what you continue to do is open doors to people that, even the people that fired you. You know, they need to hear what you're saying.
Yeah. Absolutely.
You have some. Yeah.
I did hear what he was saying. That's the problem.
That's why he got fired.
And I like to say that. That's essential. Yeah, what I'm saying. But all that's to say that until we really, that's just, it's so tough.
Yeah.
And that's what humility and that's.
One or two.
This is kind of based on your comment, and people might have said this already. I came in late, and I spoke this outside with some folks. You might hear this again, but I think that this particular flavor of Christianity is really, really important in the outside world right now. I'm not self-identified Christian, and I did grow up in like a Christian kind of community, very conservative community, and I regularly go back to this community and try to talk about environmental and social justice issues. And the only angle that even kind of opens the door is coming from the Christian perspective. And I'm here to learn about this further Christianity because I think a lot of the arguments that can be articulated from this perspective in favor of like environmental things and social justice and stuff like that are just extremely important. They're able to bridge this gap that we see so often in the political spectrum that people identify know about. Having like extreme conservative right on one end and extreme conservative or liberal left on radical left or whatever. But I think that it's actually less of a spectrum and more of a circle, and it really intersects with like anarcho-primitivism and Christianity. And I think that articulating arguments about the relationship between like God and nature, for one, is a really great place to start this conversation with people who might not be exactly like you, but it's a great way for us to come together on the things that really matter to us, the things that are really important to our lives, things like food, water, shelter, communication, love, that sort of stuff, the less abstract. It's a way to unify what has already divided us. So I think it's really important.
Is it okay if I ask a totally unrelated question?
Yeah, we might not be able to answer it, but I think we should put it in the ether.
Okay. My question is about like money and jobs, and where I'm coming from is in this society I can live for free. Outside of society, I'm more inclined to live a primitivist lifestyle, like if I wasn't where I am right now. But I got myself into debt, and as I was getting into debt, I was in the process of becoming more critical about the system that I'm a part of. And so I quit my job because of that, but I still have to get out of that debt. And so
you can choose to have that debt.
I could just not deal with it and like live somewhere else. But I just didn't know if any of you guys have any personal experience or perspectives, or like, I don't know how you guys make money, or if you do, or how you live in this society. Or, and this is open for anybody, but I appreciate any input.
That's a
from you
totally
guys.
relevant question, I find, because that's what keeps the system going, is the fact that we all owe resources. So we're born with a debt. Now yours accumulated, and recently mine as well, because I have student loans.
Yeah, that's why I owe money.
So that's my question. I mean, that's my struggle. Exactly the same thing. I don't want to have jobs, but I owe, and I owe, and I owe, and I owe even more. I have no clue.
One of the things that I'm going to put out there that doesn't seem terribly radical, but that actually, yeah, I mean, it's still very trapped. So I'm certainly not putting this out there as like, I have managed to escape. But the way that I deal with it is after I had a really cracktastic college job where I was miserable all the time and had a dominating boss and who could suck all happiness out of a room just by entering. It was so, I said that I'm not going to do anything that doesn't, I'm not going to do any kind of work that doesn't make me happy and that allows me to make some kind of change. I mean, again, not the most radical thing to you, but I've been able to do that since. And I have found too that whenever I get hired to do a job, that's almost never my call. So the two places that I've worked, or I'll be doing the place where I work now, is like I said, I work as a graphic designer at a seminary. That's my job. But the calling that I have is to do anti-racism work in that space, and that's what I do. So I use in the last two instances, I've used the thing that I was hired for as a springboard to do the work that I'm passionate about. And so Sally Mae's getting her crap, but I'm hoping that when I leave these places, that I would have done something that would be, even if it's transformative for 6 people, or made it a little bit easier for people of color to enter, or women to enter, or other underrepresented groups to enter. And so, it might be using the screwdriver that somebody gave me to make some tweaks, but that's the best way that I could think of for myself.
Do you want to add, because I have, John pretty symbolic thought and symbolism, and money is that that symbolic unit that actually keeps us. The fact that we all have a price tag we're born with. If you're born in Russia, you have one price tag. If you're born in New York, you have another price tag, and how much you owe. It's also so how to get beyond the rent, the money. Into a non-symbolic relationship with how we live, with the world, with what we eat, with what we, so that's a very good question, and there are communities who are trying to. Recently in Sweden, actually, there was a family that got in the news because their child was taken away from them by the state because they don't believe in money, and they wanted to participate in an exchange economy with Christian anarchists, Tolstoy's, and they were leaving to India, and their kid got kidnapped from the plane by the state. Exactly, but how to support this kind of initiative and community that this example does not trigger the fear in other families who have been willing to participate. That's basically excellent question. John, did you have something to add?
Oh, I actually got holes in my arms from selling plasma for a few years, and I lived in a housing co-op. That was great for 15 years. We did most of the work, so it was low rent.
Did you
Done a lot of
put this in
childcare.
Yes.
And now the government is subsidizing me. I'm getting Social Security.
You're domesticated. Who is it?
Shirted is another option. Hey John, your shirt gives a third option.
Oh yeah. I'm trying to get a
I think we need to wrap this up for now, but again, Layla and John are going to